today. I am Anthony Nelson. So let me skip that slide. A little bit about me. Here is a lengthy list of certifications that I have. Most of them I got a long time ago, and I've just managed to maintain them through my career as a restoration professional. I will tell you that the certifications are just like insurance, I would argue. The certifications, while important and good for, base knowledge and foundation and everything like that, are not a substitute for experience. So I would argue that the most important certification is the length of time that I've spent in the industry. It's an industry I know and love pretty well. Other than that, those of you who have taken a class with me will understand I'm kind of a goofball. I'm a father of two now. So the image on the left is my wife, my daughter Evelyn, who's up on my shoulders. We call her Eddie for short. And then little baby Claire, who was probably, I don't know, maybe 5-7 days old at this point. She's 5 months now and is way, way, way chunkier. But most of my free time goes to hanging out with these three ladies. And if you're keeping track, yes, there are three, and I am officially outnumbered in my own house. Even the dog is a lady in my house. So I spend a lot of time hiding out in the yard with a shovel, digging holes, and just kind of staying out of the way. All right, I have a video to show. I want to make sure, share sound. And just to give you an idea of how crazy I am and how much I really enjoy the industry.
The reason why I flooded my home was because my company, Premier Restoration, had tripled in size in the past 3 years. That growth had created a need for training. It's unfortunate, but we do not have a flood school to supply that training here, so we created our own. I was very excited, like I was almost giddy. I'm gonna flood it, I'm gonna get to hang out with these guys that I've grown with and mentored, and we're gonna learn so much together. And then it comes to the night before, and I'm walking this garden hose into my house and turning it on, and instantly the feeling of what the hell are you doing? While the only thing that was different was that this was my house, everything else was the same. We were going to use the same equipment, the same guys that I would trust in anybody else's house. They're going to come in and they're going to dry my house.
All right. So yeah, I'm the guy that flooded his own house, and the reason why I did it, I always dreamt about doing it and being able to provide training to our guys. That was something that was super important to me. But also, I don't know, I just always thought it would be fun to flood my own house, so then that way we could get to try out all the crazy weird things that we don't get to try out in everybody else's house. So it was really cool. We ended up flooding it, and then we spent a few days with our team doing training, and then I flooded another small section of it over again before we started putting it back together, and we brought a bunch of our local adjusters in so they could get some firsthand knowledge, ride around on an extractor, that kind of stuff, to be able to experience that firsthand. Now, I'm not the only guy who's ever had this idea, and if there's one individual that I am envious of, it is this gentleman right here. He's currently the president of the Restoration Industry Association, so he's probably just as nuts as I am, maybe a little more nuts. Gentleman named Mark Springer out of Montana.
Hi, I'm Mark Springer with Dayspring Restoration. After months of preparation, we're going to start a fire in my kitchen. Stay tuned over the coming months to see how Dayspring Restoration can make you whole again.
Call 541-4911.
So yeah, that's Mark. Him and I talk story quite often. And I feel like he's got one up on me because he actually lit his house on fire, which feels more impressive to me, but I don't know. I'll let you guys decide.
Hi, I'm Mark.
All right. A little bit about us. So Premier Restoration, this is our mission statement: making a difference daily by restoring the lives of people, businesses, and communities of Hawaii. It's something we do every day, and we take very seriously. Our staff is eating, living, and breathing our mission statement every day, and super proud of them. A little bit about us: our core values: customer first, communication, team, pride in work, and play to win. These are values that live in our organization, and we celebrate them daily. We did this really cool thing at the start of this year. Amazon kind of has an employee reward system called Award Co, which I guess the best way to say it is it's like internal Facebook, and our employees have the opportunity to recognize each other in accordance with our core values. And so usually on the average, we have about 10 to 15 of these examples of how our employees are living their values, our values out there every day, on a daily basis. Really, really cool. All right, so fire restoration. If anybody has sat in water or mold, you will know that there is a standard and guideline for water restoration, and there is a standard and guideline for mold remediation. However, there is not, the IICRC has not published a standard for fire restoration. So the best document we have right now is this one. So this is the Restoration Industry Association. They put out a publication in, it was the 90s, the guideline for fire and smoke damage repair. So it's a 164-page document. It was revised in 2007 and peer reviewed by about 300 people. And it was written by one individual who I would refer to as the godfather of fire restoration. Restoration Industry Association, like the IICRC, has a code of ethics that they adhere to. Their mission is to be more of an industry association, less of a certifying body like the IICRC. But their code of ethics, treat customers and their property well, provide professional service, all the good things that exist in our industry, they represent. The godfather of fire restoration is this guy, Marty King. I did have the opportunity to meet him very, very early in my career. You want to talk about an individual who was incredibly charismatic, cared more than any one man should about doing a great job specifically on a fire restoration project. His mission was very laser focused. He's one of the founding members of the Restoration Industry Association, wrote both versions of the guideline, and we lost him in 2009. But if you go to one of our industry conferences, there's a number of awards named after him. Just a really, really great and inspirational guy. The IICRC has fire restoration standards in development right now. Something really cool happened a couple years ago inside of our industry. The Restoration Industry Association and the IICRC decided to join forces, and as opposed to, they didn't really compete against each other, but both had certification classes, and there was kind of always this understanding that RIA certifications were more advanced level, call them like graduate level classes, whereas the IICRC would be the equivalent of undergrad classes. So what they decided to do was take those two streams of education and combine them, and also decide to collaborate on the development of new standards. The three standards that are currently being developed: the S710, which is standard for development of scope of work in a fire and smoke damage environment, the S740, which is essentially the same standard but focused more on personal property, so content restoration, and then the S760, which is the standard for professional restoration of structures and items damaged by wildfire smoke, which is something that really has become a super huge problem in the past decade. We have experienced a number of wildfire issues on our own here in Hawaii, and for that reason, I decided I wanted to try and make a run and get on the consensus body for the S760. So I was graciously offered a position on the consensus body, I've accepted, and I've had the opportunity to sit in a Zoom room with about 30 of the brightest minds in wildfire restoration for the past year. So we're midway through developing the standard. We've got most of the language together. We'll probably submit for peer review in June. And our goal is hopefully by the end of the year, there is a standard that was written for the restoration of structures and items damaged by wildfire smoke. Really, really cool process. Super blessed and humbled to be a part of it. Okay, so sources of fire losses. You know, one of the more common questions I get is, Anthony, how do I prevent a fire in my home? Or how do I prevent a water damage from occurring in my home? The water damage one tends to be a little bit easier to answer because, you know, there are common sources of failure that we can identify. When you talk about fires, you know, everybody's like, oh, cooking fires. Oh, those have to be the most common. Or, you know, the other one was e-cigarettes, right? Lithium ion batteries, you know, the ones that are manufactured with less than the best of, you know, manufacturing requirements. They'll just spontaneously combust. So those have to be the ones. I'll tell you that there isn't one particular source of fire that sticks out consistently that I go, this is the one that you can and should avoid. The reality is that fires happen. You know, sometimes you have somebody doing some shoddy electrical work, or sometimes they do great electrical work and there still is an issue. You know, sometimes the surge protector you bought from Walmart blows up. Nobody knows why. It's a $5 piece of, you know, equipment that, you know, it functions like a $5 piece of equipment. So number of different sources, electrical, cigarettes. We've had a couple of these where people did not extinguish their cigarette and end up lighting a fire. Kitchen fires, both grease and protein. So oil catching on fire in a skillet, or somebody leaving a turkey in the oven too long. Puffbacks are a big problem with, it's a mainland problem in homes where fuel oil is the source for heating in the winter. They can have this thing called a puffback where the smoke actually comes back through the ventilation system. They're super gnarly. Mechanical defects, lightning. We actually have had a few jobs over the past 12 years that were homes that got struck by lightning. It does happen. Gas leaks. Intentional arson. I don't like to admit it, but yeah, there's a few fire bugs that have existed over the years. Space heaters, particularly the little ones that people put under their desk to keep their feet warm. Candles, we have a couple every year from candles. Dryers, so typically what happens with the dryers is the vents get clogged with lint, and then everything gets too hot and the actual vent will catch on fire. Not too many instances where dryers themselves have caught on fire. Fireplace, you know, mostly this is when people are cleaning out their fireplace, they vacuum up all the ashes thinking they're extinguished and they're not, and then they just catch on fire in the vacuum. Barbecue, we had an incident where somebody thought their coals were extinguished, packed them up, put them in a bag, put them in the owner's closet of their condo, and then they smoldered and smoldered until they caught on fire. Natural fires, forest fires, you know, we've had our fair share of those, and construction defects. These can all be sources of fire loss. So there's a few different types of combustion that exist. Natural and organic is one of the more common ones. And so this is where, when I talk about combustion, it usually boils down to the question of what burned. If we know what was the predominant source of fuel in the fire, then we can understand what the type of combustion is, and then that will tell us what we need to do in order to clean it up. And so the natural organic fires tend to produce a dry smoke, which is, you know, so they'll produce either a dry smoke or a wet smoke, and that'll tell us, hey, like, what was the activity of the fire? So the dry smoke residues tend to indicate a more vigorous, oxygen-rich fire. The particulates are very small and dry, which make them very easy to clean. So a lot of the, when we had the large brush fire, Lahaina over like Lahaina Luna and Kaanapali Hillside in Maui, that produced a dry smoke fire. So the residue was actually very easy to clean up inside of most of the residences. The big challenge we had with that fire was, obviously there's a giant field that just burned right next to the house. So despite our best efforts to clean a house and keep it clean, it would just resoil because there's a field of ash sitting next door. The other type is wet smoke residue. So usually these aren't fires that burn and rage. These are fires that just smolder, typically low heat. And they typically have to have a viscous penetrating particulate. These are the ones that they have, like if you've got flat paint or a porous surface, they will actually impregnate the porous surface and the odor becomes more challenging to eliminate. And they tend to just, I guess, like dry fires tend to smell like a campfire, whereas the wet fires, they tend to have more like of an acidic sort of smell to them. I don't know, after years of walking into fires, I can kind of tell you which one it is. Next type of combustion is synthetic or mixed. So this is most house fires where there's a significant amount of material that has been burned. So most of the things that are inside of our house are synthetic in nature. Even when you look, like I'm looking at my kitchen cabinets right now, my kitchen cabinets, while I'm like, oh yeah, they're plywood boxes, but plywood is assembled with an adhesive and then they all have these laminate finishes over them. And those materials will create a particulate that is very penetrating. And when you go to clean it, it doesn't clean off the surface of things. It actually just smears. And so when we're cleaning it, we do a process where we've reached a point where we're like, okay, this is about as clean as we can get this surface. We cannot remove this particulate off of this wall. And we'll do what's called setting the soot, which means we'll aggressively clean it as best as we can. Usually at that point, we're not concerned with saving the wall finish or the finish of whatever we're trying to clean. And so if we cause some cosmetic damages in the process of setting the soot, it's not a big deal. But that's usually the last step when we've kind of said, okay, this is a synthetic fire. Things aren't cleaning off very well. We'll go ahead and set the soot. Very, very strongly corrosive. So these are the fires where they will, like if you've got stainless steel appliances, that kind of stuff, they'll go ahead and corrode or pit the surface of those materials. We have a process that we use to address that and make sure that doesn't happen, but that's a few slides down from here. And they just tend to be really stinky. Third type of combustion is protein. So this is the typical, oh, the turkey got left in the oven sort of scenario. The protein odor particulates are very hard to find. So typically when you walk into a fire and you're scoping it, what most people do is we call it a white test. And if you read about white tests inside the like the RAA guidelines, they're typically recommending some sort of terry cloth or a white glove. But very commonly, we'll walk in and just use this, right? I'll take my finger, I'll wipe it on the surface, and then I'll look at my finger and I'll be able to see if there's any smoke particulate that is accumulated on the surface of those items just by visually looking at what came up when I wiped. That is true for all types of combustion with the exception of protein. I won't be able to see that. But these are the stinkiest types of fires. And these are the ones that typically make you want to turn and run out of the door. They do not smell good. They're very, very sticky, whereas like the synthetic fires tend to be a little more smeary. Like I always feel like it's like melted plastic. The protein fires tend to be just horribly, horribly sticky. I'm trying to think, like it's almost like you put wood glue on a surface. Like they're just that sticky and tacky. And they just stink. They're the worst ones. So whenever we have a protein fire, we know that getting rid of the odor is going to be one of the biggest challenges, because it's going to be really hard for us to identify the soot. And additionally, the soot just does not smell good. All right, so process for how we respond to fires. This is kind of a little bit more specific to Premier Restoration, but I would argue that most professional restorers have their own way or method that they go about responding to fires in an emergency. But this is what we teach our staff. So number one, empathy is the key. We do a lot of restoration, and one of the greatest problems that faces our industry is the fact that we get desensitized, right? This may be our 100th fire that we've walked into this year, but reliably, this is the first fire that individual is experiencing. So usually the first question I ask is everybody okay? And in most circumstances, everybody is okay. There are a few circumstances where people die in fires, but we've, between the fire department, the building departments, all those types of things, there's tons of life safety measures involved in construction nowadays. And generally, by and large, most people, if there is a fire, they do tend to make it out okay. And then I always encourage our staff, if not, like, there is the possibility that somebody didn't make it out alive, or maybe an animal or a pet didn't make it out alive, or, even something as simple as a 5-year-old's stuffed bear that burned up in the fire. Like, always take the time to acknowledge the fact that there was a loss and give that some space, and a lot of the times we do this, and just by simply, exhibiting compassion and just giving a little bit of time in the conversation, right? Like, we've got a lot that we want to communicate, but nothing is more important than the loss that our customers have experienced. Next thing we'll do is ask if the home is livable. And this is such a subjective question. I've had people who have said their home is very livable, and I've walked in and been like, there's no way you should stay here. And then the inverse is true too, where it's been such a small fire and the bedrooms and bathrooms and all that are on the complete opposite side of the house, but our customer is saying, hey, this is not livable for me. And I'm like, you know what, like, I would live here. It wouldn't be a big deal for me. But so just know that it's subjective. Red Cross has a great relocation program, and then a lot of the times we'll step in. We have, I call it our fire assistance program, but basically it's an authority limit. So any member of our company, when they're responding to a fire, they can spend up to $500 to fix any problem that somebody has had as a result of a fire, no questions asked. So whether that's one of our technicians, one of our business development managers, myself, if you need to put somebody up at Maui Beach for 2 nights, cool. If they lost all their clothes and you need to go buy Walmart gift cards, cool. I don't care if I get the job. The reality is somebody lost something, and it's our duty and responsibility to be there for our community, and that's how we do it. Next question we ask is the home still standing? A lot of the times we can know a lot about our scope of work if we know if the home is still standing or not. How many rooms are affected? And then usually our last question is, are there any doors, windows that are broken? I'm very, very concerned about making sure that we maintain security. We have had several instances where looters will come in after a fire and start stealing stuff from somebody who already just went through something tragic. And I like to make sure that doesn't happen. So whether that's, temporary fencing around the perimeter of the property, or, boarding up the windows and doors that the fire department had to take out in order to ventilate the structure, kind of whatever the security issues are, we want to make sure that we respond in an emergency capacity and address those. And I think that's my next slide. Yeah, so board up. Reasons we do board up, we want to make sure that we're securing their personal property. There is a process. If any one of you have had one of your insureds go through a fire, you'll be familiar with this, but there's a process called cause and origin, where the insurance carriers will hire an investigator to come in, and that person's job is to determine the cause and origin of the fire and make sure that there is, indirectly their job is to make sure that there's coverage, that whatever incident happened is a covered peril under the policy. And majority of the time it is. The other thing that they do in CNO is try and determine if there's subrogation. So if the source of the fire was the microwave and it was a manufacturing defect, then, and let's assume that I'm not picking on Samsung, but let's assume that it's a Samsung microwave. What they'll do is they'll go ahead and try and subrogate for the loss against Samsung as a manufacturer defect. And so this cause and origin process, depending on if there's subrogation or not, can get quite lengthy because they have to allow the manufacturer an opportunity to come and inspect as well. The other reason we board out liability for trespassers, like I said, people have a fire. A lot of the times these are on the news, and people just get curious, So very often we've showed up to losses and found people stomping around and been like, hey, what are you doing here? Like, are you supposed to be here? Do you know this person? If not, like, scram, get out of here. And then lastly, peace of mind for our customers, our insureds. The reality is that they've lost something, and we want to make sure that they don't lose anything else. If there is, a lot of the times fire department, depending on the fire, they'll show up, they'll put it out either with water or I know Maui, Honolulu, I'm not sure about the other outer islands. They do have the dry foam now. So we're seeing a little bit more of the dry foam, but on the larger fires, they're still using water to put them out. So we'll come in, we'll extract, set up drying equipment as needed. And we do this to make sure that further damage doesn't occur. The worst thing is you have a fire, nobody comes in and mitigates the water that was used to put out the fire, and then all of a sudden you start growing mold on a bunch of surfaces that were previously unaffected by the fire or the water. So that's our primarily motivation there. And then the other thing that we're really concerned about is, and we'll revisit this as we go through the slides, but whenever soot and water mix together, they form acid. And this acid is actually what becomes corrosive and will pit metal surfaces, ceramic surfaces, anything that's subject to acid corroding it. Other thing we'll do, particularly if the house is going to remain being occupied, is we'll set up some initial odor mitigation. Commonly what we'll do is we'll take one of these units, which is a giant air filter, a HEPA air filter, and all this does is filter all particulate matter down to 0.3 microns in size. That is everything up to and including bacteria. When you start looking at bacteria and viruses, there are some bacterias and some viruses that are smaller than 0.3 microns in size. One of the big questions I had over the past year and change was, hey, is HEPA filtration effective against coronavirus? And yes, because coronavirus is such a large particulate, it'll get caught by our HEPA filters. Usually with our air scrubbers, we will go ahead and use charcoal filters. And what the charcoal filters do is they have an oxidizing effect. So as the air is passing through the charcoal filter, it will neutralize any odors that are present in the airstream. On an initial odor mitigation step, we can also do thermal fogging. We have both hydroxyls and ozone, which are similar but different. Ozone cannot be used in an occupied space, whereas hydroxyls can. And then some simple things like pairing agents. We have these little, they're like little rock. They look like little rocks, like little pebbles. And they're called crystal odor counteractant. And what they do is they emit a pairing fragrance that helps psychologically neutralize any fire odors. So it doesn't really remove fire odors, but if you're in the space for a long period of time, it gives your brain something to smell that directly pairs against the nuisance odors of a fire. So I had a hard time. Like corrosion is a hard thing to illustrate in a fire. And so I found this graphic on the internet that it kind of helps. Now, this is, this was somebody who was looking at it more from an environmental perspective, and they're, trying to illustrate, hey, here's what comes out of a power plant, and then it mixes with gas, the gas and moisture in the air, and then that falls as acid rain. But that's essentially what happens when we're looking at, inside of a structure relative to corrosion mitigation. So, the fire byproducts will mix with, moisture and other molecular compounds in the atmosphere, and they will turn into acid. And then this acid will corrode or etch metals, porcelains, stone, other materials. Like I'm looking at my kitchen right now, so it'll etch my appliances, my faucet, all the handles on my cabinets. I've got a giant aluminum door wall. It'll start to corrode that. All the door knobs, handles, like I've got a freestanding shelf with brackets, it'll start to corrode those brackets. So there's a number of finishes that most people don't consider in their house that are subject to this corrosion. And we try and make an educated guess or judgment on the corrosion. And so if it's a fire that looks like cause and origin is going to take a long time, we're going to be much more, we're going to want to do corrosion mitigation, much more intensely, I guess I would say. Whereas if it's a fire where it's a small kitchen fire and, the insured is like, yeah, can you be here tomorrow? Can you start cleaning tomorrow? We're probably going to skip the step of corrosion mitigation because we're going to go to deep cleaning so fast that it won't matter. What we were going to try and prevent on day one will prevent on day two. And so it's always a subjective call that we make as to whether or not to proceed with corrosion mitigation. So it's real simple. What we'll do is we'll come in with aerosol cleaners. Usually sometimes we'll actually mix up a bucket of, odor, smoke odor counteractant and a surfactant. But we try and keep it easy. And so a lot of the times it's just aerosol cleaners. We'll come in, we'll clean those surfaces that we're concerned about. So in this vanity, we were obviously concerned about the ceramic tile. We were concerned about the sinks. We were concerned about the faucets and even the laminate countertop. But as you can see, the cabinets, we didn't take the effort to clean because we're not as concerned about corrosion on those cabinets. So we'll go ahead, we'll clean them. And then usually we'll use a silicone spray to go ahead and put a coating on top of those materials that are subject to corrosion. And what that does is it prevents any sort of soot particulate or acids from settling on those after we've cleaned them until we can come in and do a full and deep clean. All right. Wow, I'm ripping through these. Okay, so we will go ahead and take a short break. And when we come back, we'll watch a quick video on why seconds count when it comes to a fire. So let's see, it is, what time is it? It is 9, oh man, I don't even have my phone on me. It is what, 9:05, so call it 9:15. We'll be back. All right. So Dora, you raised your hand. I don't know if you intended to do that, but did you have a question? You can answer in the chat as well if that's easier. I know some folks are in busy offices and trying to mute. So my screen shows Anthony Nelson screen sharing. Please end screen sharing. Is that, did that fix the issue, Dora? If you could go ahead and reply, that'd be great. Kira, you want to confirm for me that everything's looking
Everything looks good on my end. Yeah, your presentation is now showing, and
okay.
Dora confirms she can see it. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So what this is a quick video on just how fast, illustrating just how fast fires can actually spread. And of course they have the horribly ominous 80s music that goes along with it. So this was started in a trash can behind some chairs. Then you can see as the fire continues to grow, that layer of smoke at the top starts to push down. All right. So as you can see in that, it was only 2 minutes and 45 seconds that it takes for a fire to kind of take over an entire room. And I always feel like this video is a good example too, because the trash can is adjacent to sources that can combust, but not near things like draperies where it can accelerate really quickly. So you see it takes about 1 minute and 30 seconds before it really starts to engulf the whole room. And I also like that video because you can visually see there's this phenomenon, you know, like Marty would call it stratification, but when you walk into a room that has experienced some sort of high heat fire, there's usually a line that you can visibly see on the drywall where the high heat level was. And things that were above that line tend to have a ton of smoke and a ton of heat exposure. That's where anything that is plastic or like candles, wax in that high heat line, they're just going to melt. The temperature is so great. It's, 400, 500, can get upwards of thousands of degrees in that high heat line. But below that high heat line, things tend to be a little bit more salvageable, especially when you're talking about items that are not in the room of origin and not in the room of combustion. You tend to be able to restore things that are closer to the ground as opposed to things that are higher up. Whenever drywall gets exposed to that high heat too, you'll be able to visibly see the screws. And back when they used to hang drywall with nails, we call them nail pops, but there's these little black dots that'll show up on the drywall because the screws actually heat up and cool at a faster rate than the drywall. And so what they'll do is they'll actually condensate, and then all the ash and soot that's in the air will go to that little spot, and it'll create this like pencil eraser sized black dot where every single screw is. And that kind of helps us identify, okay, where did the high heat go, those types of things, and really aids us in determining salvageability. So I did get our polls up, which is awesome because I love doing them. Let's see. Oh, this is poll. I did it wrong. Dang it. I always do this wrong. Okay, so we're going to have to skip the polls. And looks like we have a question here. We have a question. Dora's okay. So Dora's all good. All right. We'll keep going. So personal property. One of the first things that we'll do is we'll evaluate on site to see if we need to pack out the personal property or if we can leave it on site and we can clean it on site. And there's advantages and disadvantages to doing both methods. So for packouts, typically this is for larger fires or fires where there's a high density of contents, not even like hoarder situations, but and I'll tell you, like fires that exist in, the 500 to 700 square foot, studio and 1-bedroom condos in Waikiki, like a lot of the times we end up packing those out simply because there's not enough space to manipulate the personal property from one side of a room to another to effectively clean things. The pack-out process does allow us to create a pretty accurate salvageable and unsalvageable inventory, whereas clean on site might prove problematic. And usually when there's any reconstruction, particularly flooring, we're going to lean heavier on packing out just because a lot of the times we have to replace the flooring that's underneath all the personal property in the home. And the only effective way to do that is to pack everything out. Now, clean on site, small fires with no structural damage. If we don't have to replace floors, replace drywall, cabinets, or if it's a standard, like grease flare up on a kitchen countertop that got put out real quick, a lot of the times we will opt to clean on site, particularly in homes that have large spaces, limited quantity of contents, the North Kihei oceanfront rental that, is rented 300 days out of the year, doesn't have a ton of contents in it. So it makes sense for us to clean those. And then even in situations where we're doing pack out, we may elect to leave large items in place, particularly those things that are fragile or tend to be problematic in moving. Sometimes we'll do a blend of pack out and or clean on site. And then, anytime we have challenging logistics, I go back to that small Waikiki condo example. Sometimes it's more cost effective to pack out, but sometimes if it's, a 4-story walk up and it's on the 4th floor and we're just like, what, by the time we pack everything out, we can deal with the hassle and headache of moving everything around. We may elect to clean on site. And so there's not a one size fits all, and it is always a subjective call based on what the scope of cleaning and the scope of reconstruction are going to be. What we'll do is, in either circumstance, we'll do our best to determine salvageability. Those items that were rendered unsalvageable as a result of the fire versus those items that are typically salvageable. So things that are typically unsalvageable, any items exposed to high heat, I talked about that heat line in the room. Anything above that heat line is usually not salvageable. Any plastics, even those plastics that were not subject to high heat, they tend to be very difficult to get the odor out of. Even if they were just on the floor in an adjacent room and they had sufficient soot settle on them, you would think that plastics we should be able to clean, but they hold on to odor really well, and tend to be very porous at a molecular level. And then most porous items, things, mattresses, right? Like, even if I can clean your mattress, most people are like, man, that mattress went through a fire. Like, I don't want to sleep on that. And, there's just cause for that too. You spend 8 hours a day with your face, inches from a mattress. The cost benefit of just replacing that mattress usually makes sense. And most adjusters we talk to, like, they get it. They're like, yeah, go ahead and just replace the mattress, because I know it's going to make our insured happier and they're going to have more confidence in everything else that we're doing because we decided to replace this mattress, even though we may have been able to save it. Pillows, stuffed animals, if they're sentimental, yeah, we can save them, but usually the porous items become less cost effective to save. Now, those items that are typically salvageable, most things made out of wood are usually salvageable. Even furniture that got exposed to a little bit of heat where there's no charring, but there's cosmetic damages to the finish. A lot of wood furniture, if it's of high value, can be stripped and refinished to save it. Metal items usually survive well. Ceramics, most items not subject to high heat, like all the clothes in your closet. If the closet was not the source origin, like let's say it was a kitchen fire, and we're talking all the soft goods that are in the master bedroom, we can usually save those. Most fabrics and textiles, as long as they're not subject to high heat, we can save them. Either bulk laundry, dry clean only, heirloom wedding dresses. There are individuals in our industry who specialize in saving some of these, more sentimental or higher value textiles and fabrics. We've sent probably 4 Coach bag collections or Louis Vuitton bag collections to the mainland for restoration, just because the value of them, if I can clean and save them for $50 a bag, then you're probably pretty happy. But your purse that's off the shelf from Target, yeah, maybe you just replace that one because it costs less than $50. So the other thing that we have available is an ultrasonic processing machine. And so the way that this works is, it looks like a giant bathtub. Honestly, I'll tell you what, I'll play this video and then I'll talk about it, because this will help illustrate a number of the benefits of doing ultrasonics. Oh, so this one doesn't have audio. That's right. So here's a socket that went through a fire. And so you have this pre-wash tank, which goes ahead and removes a majority of the soil. And then we'll dip it in the ultrasonic tank for 5 to 15 minutes. Now, ultrasonic is, it's actually sound that creates cavitation in the water, which allows us to clean things. And so you'll see this super rusty socket. We just put in this tank for about 10 minutes, and then we rinse it off. We spray a rust inhibitor on it, and then that socket is good as new. And we allow up to 8 hours for it to dry. And so usually things like sockets, yeah, as long as they still function the way they did and they're not covered in rust, people are completely happy to not have to go buy new sockets. And our cost to restore them tends to be very, very low. So ultrasonics, if anybody's ever gone to the jeweler with a dirty ring, most jewelers have a small ultrasonic machine in their back, and that's what they use to clean your ring. So what happens with ultrasonics is it creates sound waves in the water. Those sound waves in the water create what's called cavitation, which is basically movement or vibration at a molecular level. And that's what creates the cleaning effect on the surfaces of things that can go into the ultrasonic tank. Great candidates for ultrasonics. Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay. Great candidates for ultrasonics tend to be durable goods, like these plates. They were processed through ultrasonics, metals, pretty much anything that you can clean with water. We will clean using ultrasonics just because it allows us to clean a whole lot really fast. Way, way, way faster than if we were sitting there and hand cleaning every single one of these plates. We can load them up in a rack, drop them in, turn the ultrasonic machine on for 10 minutes. They come out sparkling clean. And then while that machine's running, we'll load up the next batch to go through. So usually when we have a house fire, we'll go ahead and try and pack out by how we're going to clean. So all the ultrasonics will go in the same boxes. All the soft goods will go in the same boxes. All the hand clean only items will go in the same boxes. So then that way, when they get back to our facility, you know, each box kind of has its station that it goes to. So for durable goods, if they have no cosmetic defects and there's no corrosion, it can usually be cleaned. When it comes to soft goods, as long as there's no high heat exposure, no stuffing, like a lot of the times stuffing, you know, either natural or synthetic stuffing kind of doesn't matter. As long as there's not a void where the smoke odor particulates can get in there, then we can usually clean them. And, you know, soft goods are a good example of things like, usually if there's no cosmetic defects, we can save it. It's just, what's the value of the item? You know, if this jacket is worth $500 and it cost us $200 to save it, you're going to say, yes, absolutely, go save my jacket. But if this jacket is, you know, Target special $29.99 and it costs us $200 to save this jacket, you're probably like, no, just throw it away because it's more cost effective for us to go and buy a new one. Electronics, contrary to popular belief, are very, very easy to clean if we can get to them right away. So electronics are one of the things that are very subject to corrosion. And so that same problem that we talked about earlier, where moisture mixes with soot in the air and turns into an acid, if that acid lands on any of the electrical components like a circuit board, one little spot of corrosion on a circuit board can, you know, like if you've ever looked at a circuit board, it's like this map of all these little roads. One little spot of corrosion on one of those roads on that circuit board can cause that individual process to not work, and then the whole circuit board is pretty much useless. So as long as we can get to the electronics before corrosion can start, usually we can save them. Now, electronics are another good example, like soft goods, where it may not be cost advantageous for us to attempt to save them. You know, like this computer, like this is actually a server. So servers are kind of a bad example, but like a normal home computer, the price point on a normal home computer has come down so much that if I said, look, I need to spend $300 to go in and completely detail out this computer, depending on, you know, like if it's a high-end gaming computer, yes, that probably makes sense. If it's, you know, just an off the shelf at, you know, $379 Costco special, yeah, we're at that point where you go, you know what, like cost versus benefit, I kind of, you know, it just makes more sense to do a new computer. Now, the other thing that you run the risk with electronics is a lot of the times you don't have the opportunity to test them for function before you clean them because you're wanting to clean them as fast as possible. So you'll go through the exercise of cleaning them thinking that, you know, there hasn't been sufficient time for corrosion to have occurred. And then sometimes when you're done with them and you go turn them on and test them for function, they don't function. So electronics tend to be kind of I don't know, so I don't want to say risky, because, you know, at the end of the day, if we didn't clean it and we didn't save it, we just don't charge you for it. And hopefully we're cleaning enough contents that, okay, we can say we're not cleaning for this and it's just fine. But we always want to be sure that we're trying to make smart and equitable decisions on behalf of the policyholders and the adjusters when we're looking at contents. It, you know, it's very, like, it's an interesting dynamic, because, you know, the adjusters always walk into a situation and, you know, they're trying to be mindful of costs and be fair and make sure that they are indemnifying the insured for their loss. You know, the insureds typically, you know, if you said, hey, do you want us to try and save everything, or do you just want us to throw it all away and buy new? Like, if that was the only question you asked them, a lot of them would be like, well, yeah, I'd just rather have new stuff, right? But when you start layering in, okay, like, nobody's going to pay you to go shop for all this stuff, like your time invested, nobody's going to pay you to do that. You know, in addition to, like, and can you find it, right? Like, the things that you have, the way the marketplace is, you know, inventory, I swear, at Target, you know, Costco, Walmart, wherever, the inventory turns over about once every 6 months. And the same thing, if you really enjoyed, I don't know, a chair or a certain product that you bought at Walmart, you reliably can't find it again in 6 months. And then, you know, kind of the complexities associated with shopping for all these things and establishing the value of these things. When you start to really look at it, it becomes more advantageous for our customers to simply take the things that we know we can save, clean them, and return them. And then usually policy limits will come into play too. You know, if somebody's got a $60,000 limit on a 2-bedroom condo that, you know, they actually live in, a lot of the times we'll be fighting against that limit. And so one of the more efficient uses of those dollars is actually saving as much as we possibly can. You know, when I send a bill for, you know, $30,000 for contents restoration, you know, people are like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that, like, that all actually costs $30,000. But then when we look at the inventory, if you were to tally up replacement costs, that replacement cost might be $100,000. And so if you're sitting there looking at a $60,000 contents limit, you might go, you know what, like, I'm super thankful that you were able to save all these things for 30 grand. I digress. So electronics, those electronics that have no circuit boards, easiest thing in the world to clean. Like my toaster, never a problem. Well, actually, those electronics that don't have circuit boards, we'll actually clean with ultrasonics. We'll just put them in the ultrasonic tank, get them dry, and, you know, with electronics that don't have circuit boards, as long as they're not powered on when they're wet, everything is going to be fine with them. We can process them with ultrasonics. Light soot usually yields a better result, but what we're really concerned about with electronics is moisture, and I'm not talking about direct contact with water. I'm talking about the relative humidity in the air. Like, if it is a steamy day, when the fire occurs, the probability of corrosion on the circuit boards is going to be pretty great. If it is super dry, then the probability of corrosion on the circuit boards is going to be pretty light. So yeah, electronics, deep dark rabbit hole. Probably one of the coolest stories that I have on electronics restoration is the computer lab in one of the elementary schools was directly adjacent to the source of a fire. And by all intents and purposes, it was this pretty simple job. We could do the cleaning in a day, but there were, you know, 25 computers sitting in a room, and obviously cleaning those 25 computers can take quite a bit of time. We have an ultrasonics processing suite, which is basically allows us to take electronics that have circuit boards, and as opposed to cleaning them with normal water, we actually will deionize the water. So then that way it is just straight H2O. We'll be able to clean them and then dry them rapidly. And usually, you know, as long as we get to them fast enough, everything will work out. So in that specific instance, we were able to take our electronics cleaning suite on site, clean 24 computers in 2 days, and in 3 days they went from having a fire to having kids come back to school. And I think we now post-COVID all know the value of our children being able to go back to school. It's a really, really good thing. Specialty items, so things that are, you know, have sentimental value or that kind of stuff, you know, they tend to be the most problematic items for us, because, you know, I don't know what the value of a jersey is, right? So this particular jersey, because it has a signature on it, you know, the carrier is going to look at it and go, okay, what's the value of it as a jersey, right? Like, it's just a Pirates jersey. It's probably brand new, crisp, off the shelf, 80, maybe if it's a really cool jersey, $100. But then you put the signature on it. And once you put that signature on it, the, you know, the sentimental value or the implied value of the jersey goes through the roof. So a lot of the times we have, you know, partnerships with, you know, dry cleaners here locally. And then for some real specialty stuff, we'll utilize our contacts on the mainland. And, you know, the homeowner who has this jersey wants this jersey back. And a lot of the times it's less about the fact that it's value and has somebody's signature on it. And it's more about, you know, like the experience of when they went and got this jersey, you know. And so often one of the main questions we'll ask when we're doing contents restoration in particular is, you know, what's the one thing you really want me to focus on? What's the one thing you really want me to spend time, energy, and effort trying to save? Sometimes it's a box of photos, right? And so we'll spend the extra time, energy, and effort to get that box of photos cleaned. Or other times it's items like this, you know. And so this jersey, like I said, $80 to $100 off the shelf, maybe $120. I don't know. I'm not a sports guy. I don't buy jerseys much anymore. This was $350 to restore. So use one of our mainland resources to do it. But I'm not going to go back to this homeowner without knowing that I can save this jersey and knowing how important it was. And I'm not going to go back to him and say, oh, well, it wasn't worth it to save. Like, that's just not a conversation as a human you can have with another human. You do what you need to do to get them taken care of. And then, you know, we'll have the conversations with the adjusters on the backside. And, you know, I will say most adjusters are like, okay, yeah, no, I get it. Totally cool paying $350 to clean this. Some of them aren't, because they're interpreting the policy very strictly, and they're like, look, I need to indemnify the insured, and that means $80 to $100 is what we should spend on this item. And so often, you know, it happens once, twice, maybe 3 times a year across all of our locations. We'll just do it because it's that important to our customers. And kind of back to our mission statement, right? Like, you know, that's our job. That's what we're here for. That's our purpose. And so part of, you know, making right on that mission statement is making things like this happen. So I share all that with all of you today. Like, it is possible. A lot of these higher value items, it is possible. We ran into somebody who had an Oriental rug collection. It wasn't massive. There was only like 8 of them, but each of these rugs was in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $20,000. And unfortunately, they weren't scheduled on the policy, which I would hope, you know, because you guys are agents, like, yeah, try and take the time, ask those questions. It makes it easier for us. But they weren't scheduled on the policy. And so whether they wanted to be replaced or not, like the reality is there wasn't sufficient limits to cover the loss. And so we were able to, I took this, it was one of the certifications, this rug cleaning certification I took. And what we'll do with rugs is we'll actually build a submersion tank, which is code for a 4-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch deep swimming pool for rugs. we'll actually float the rugs in there with a surfactant and a smoke odor counteractant, and then actually use like a process of putting water in on one side of the pool and removing it from the other side to rinse the rugs, because the big problem with Oriental rugs is the dyes are usually natural in nature. They're not synthetic, which means they're very, very subject to bleeding. And a lot of these rugs have intricate patterns, lots of colors. And so this is the way that we're able to maintain the integrity of the rugs, save them. Never short on stories. Then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and generate the inventory. Two big categories we'll use is salvageable and unsalvageable. And we'll go ahead and make that determination, usually on behalf of our customers, our insureds. A lot of the times, you know, you'll find insureds who want to like be 100% involved and have control of every decision that gets made. And then you'll find those who are relatively hands off and are like, hey, I don't have time. You know, like the typical household of 4 with 2 young kids is that demographic of people is usually like, okay, like I just need my house back, man. Just tell me what I need to do. So what we'll do, we have a software that's called Encircle. We'll assemble the salvageable and unsalvageable inventories in that software with photo documentation. So then that way, the photo documentation serves a number of different interests. Number one, it gives the adjusters proximity to the claim at a distance. So then that way they can go when our invoice shows up and, you know, it's $30,000 and then they see, you know, like 500 to 800 items that were cleaned, you know, you quickly do the math and you go, okay, that makes sense. You know, an average of X per value. The other thing it'll do is it gives our customers, our insureds, you know, the information they need to process and resolve the unsalvageable side of their claim. So a lot of the times our inventory will have information on it. It'll have photos, but it won't have the values associated with the items. That's not typically a service we provide. There's a third party that we can send our inventories to, and they'll go ahead and provide those values if that's a request of our insured or the adjuster. And then, but it gives them the inventory, and then literally all they have to do is be like, okay, I think I spent $5 on that. Oh, I've got the receipt for that. I know it was $250. And so they're able to assemble their unsalvageable inventory, and literally all they're doing is writing down values. Where we see a lot of claims, fire claims take forever to be resolved is in generating the unsalvageable inventory, that whole process. And if you're not working with a contractor who provides that service and you have to do it on your own, usually what you end up with is an Excel template from the adjuster and a little bit of direction, and then the insureds are just turned loose to develop their own inventory. So we looked at it, you know, being consistent with our mission statement. We're like, hey, we want to provide this value. It's not something that's special. A majority of our competitors will do it. But, you know, having that inventory, particularly the unsalvageable side, is good. And then also for our customers, you know, the simple fact that we take the time to put together a pretty detailed inventory of their stuff helps build confidence. And then for us on the backside, we have a record of everything we took from the home. We'll get the inventory signed off on by our customers. So then that way they, you know, it's a simple recognition. Yes, Premier Restoration's employees were here. They took these items from my home with the intent to clean them. And then that way, when we're returning things, you know, depending on, you know, I always have faith and believe that all of our customers are very well intentioned and work really hard to do the right thing. But every once in a while, we run into one or two who tend to be a little unsavory. And this gives us objective data to fight that conversation or have that conversation of when somebody was like, you know, this drawer had these items in it and you did not return them. And we can go, well, no, here's the photo of the drawer before we pack the items. Here's photos of the individual items. That's specifically what we found in that drawer. So it helps us kind of all be honest with each other when those conversations need to be had. So inventories, salvageable and unsalvageable, we do them by room as well. So then that way you can cross-reference, and, usually this is because insureds are going, hey, I'm looking for this, where is it? And, typically it's keys. I don't know why it's always keys, but like, oh, the keys to the storage unit were in the desk that was in the third bedroom. And usually we'll be able to look at our inventory and go, keys, okay, box 47 in container 5 in our warehouse. And so if they need those items before the reconstruction's done on their home, we'll be able to go get them. We try and limit that with our customers, like give them once or twice free of charge, like, hey, you need to get some stuff, we totally understand, and we'll do that. But we also, there's a significant cost associated with going and getting those items, and out of respect to the carrier and their concerns, we usually say, hey, you get 1 or 2, and maybe a third if it's really important. We try and be flexible, but we don't want this to happen every day. Now, the other thing it'll list is storage locations for us. Like I said, box 47, container 5, just so then that way we know where everything is. And the other thing this provides both for the adjuster and the insured is like a third-party perspective on what is salvageable versus unsalvageable. And, kind of, if you leave somebody who just experienced a fire to their own devices and the emotions that all of us naturally go through when we're experiencing loss, sometimes those emotions create bad feelings and ill will with the adjusters, and then the temptation is there on behalf of the insured to say things are unsalvageable when maybe they may not be, right? Everybody who goes through a fire kind of goes through the stages of grief, and anger is one of those stages. And when you're angry and you kind of want to get something for being angry, I try not to be offended by those types of things, because it's just human nature. If any one of us went through a fire, we'd probably be pretty angry and maybe look up at the heavens and start asking God why it happened to us, right? So all's fair in that regard. What's important is that we can have those conversations, and then we have objective information that we can come together on to resolve whatever the issue is. So once everything has been inventoried and packed out, we have our salvageables, we have our unsalvageables. All of our locations have storage in them, and they're usually in these containers. So these are pretty nifty, if I'm being honest. The way that they work, so they pack flat. They're 7 by 7 by 7 foot or 7 by 7 by 10 foot long, and this allows us. They're all weather. So whether they're inside my warehouse or on a job site, doesn't matter. And the question I always get is, well, how do I know that mold's not going to grow on my stuff when they're in these containers? As long as everything goes into these containers dry, it will reliably come out just fine. There are exceptions, things that fine finishes in a home that you would always want to have some sort of climate control on. We would want to have some sort of climate control on, but most of us in Hawaii don't live in spaces that are fully conditioned 100% of the time. And so our personal property is used to the normal ebbs and flows of, rises in temperatures, falls in temperatures. And, I think we've had these containers for 7 years. We really have not had a significant issue in storing them outside, even through, what was it? Tropical Storm Flossie, and like even the most recent range in March, we have a ton of these in our back lot in Maui, and they tend to be just fine. If at all possible, we like to keep them on location, because then that way we don't have to throw anything in the back of a truck and take it back to our warehouse. But, there are times where we need to, and there are times where it makes sense. For example, if we're restoring all the personal property, we're going to have to bring it back to our warehouse, because we can just clean that much more efficiently at our warehouse than we can on site. And so they can be stored on location or off-site, either at a storage facility. We've dropped them in, was it Hawaii Self Storage has their base yard in Mililani. We've dropped them there, so then that way a customer in Mililani can go to the storage unit and get whatever they need whenever they need it. Completely flexible. And so we try and, people who've gone through a fire, we try and make sure that they have what they need and accommodate them to the best of our ability and in the way that it makes complete sense. Okay, moving on to structure. So there's a number of different materials within a structure that can become impacted. This is a list out of Marty's book. So, you know, you see there's wood, like 3 different lines for wood. So wood unfinished, right? Wood with a clear finish or wood with a painted finish. And the columns are, you know, what type of damage did these items receive? Slight, moderate, or severe? And then if you can categorize the type of damage they receive, then you can determine if they are salvageable or not. So the good example is wood, you know, so you see unfinished wood, which is framing, you know, 2x4s, 2x6s, plywood, those types of things. If they just have light scorching, the opening of grain or pores, then it is slight damage. If they have some dark scorching, then it is moderate. But once you see charring, then it becomes severe. And the term that most of us in the industry use to define charring on unfinished wood is, we call it alligatoring, which I know seems super silly, but if you ever looked at the back of an alligator, you'll see those like square bumps that go down the back of it. And that's exactly what a charred piece of unfinished wood looks like. So I always like that definition. You know, when you talk about finishes, like minor blistering of the finishes or discoloring, those fall into the slight, whereas, you know, discoloration under the finish and burned paint or discoloration of the substrate, those tend to be pretty moderate. If you look at painted drywall, if it's subject to some slight damages, there's really not much that happens with drywall, maybe a little bit of discoloring of the paint, depending on the finish of the paint. Sometimes we can clean it off, sometimes we can't. When you start to see moderate, you know, scorching, discoloration, that's pretty common. And then when it's severe, like drywall will actually, if it's exposed to enough heat over a long enough period of time, it actually just breaks down and turns into dust. Let's pick another one. What would be common? Plastic. So plastic, even those plastic items that receive just a coat or a dusting of soot, you're just going to see that dusting of soot and you'll not see any sort of response. Same thing with moderate. And then once you get into some of the higher heat stuff, you'll see sagging and distortion. But even those plastics that have only received slight damage can be unsalvageable just because we can't get the odor out. Let's pick one more. Let's go synthetic drapery fabric, you know, kind of the same thing where you don't see any responses on slight or moderate, but once you start to see the severe side, they're melting, the yarn's distorting. But with synthetic or natural drapes, you still have the same problem you do with plastic in the fact that it's less like the visual component of it, you know, like less the, you know, cosmetic damages that have occurred and more to do with, you know, the odor side of the equation. Really, really helpful chart. If you're like me, you kind of tend to live in this world and want to put everything you know into a table. So I appreciate this stuff. So from a structural perspective, things that are typically unsalvageable, any items remaining wet for more than 3 days. And that is items that it's not necessarily because of the smoke or soot or the heat. It's because they were wet for 3 days. At 72 hours, the category of the water has gone from category 1, clean water, to category 2, gray water, to category 3, black water. And we're wanting to remove those items, not necessarily because of, you know, odor concerns or, you know, cosmetic reasons, but because there's a health hazard with bacteria, mold, those types of things. One side of double wall installations. So whenever you have even the lightest amount of heat with a fire, it will actually cause pressurization within the building. And once that building becomes pressurized, it's kind of like it will push smoke particulate into the walls through cracks, crevices. Most drywall doesn't go all the way to the floor. There's imperfections within the building envelope, and it will push in there. And so the only way to clean and deodorize the inside of a wall cavity is to get access to it. And so we try and do this pretty intelligently where, if there's a bunch of kitchen cabinets on one wall, but on the opposite side of that double wall installation, it's a living room, we're going to pull the living room side so we can leave the cabinets in place. Any items exposed to high heat typically tend to not be salvageable. I talked about that heat line with drywall. A lot of the times, if we see those nail pops, we will pull that wall because we know for sure there is something that needs to be cleaned out of there. Draperies, carpets, laminates, or other synthetic floors, kind of in the same lens of petroleum-based products, just tend to hang on to odor. And then those structural items with heavy char, or, as I like to call it, the alligatoring. Those items that are typically salvageable, any items dried within 3 days. If it was wet, then we could get it dry in 3 days. Usually we can save it. Most woods, metals, ceramics, stones, and even drywall not exposed to high heat. A lot of the times we can clean drywall. Sometimes we have to clean and encapsulate drywall, but drywall tends to be a little bit more resilient. Most mechanical systems, so either forced air, split, AC window units, those types of things, if we can get to them right away and make sure that no corrosion happens, we can save them. And most floors made of natural materials, as long as they weren't subject to high heat. We did a fire in a really, just like a classically beautiful residence, Manoa Valley, and had these beautiful natural wood floors in them. And the owners were very, very concerned. And so we were able to, there was one small section where they had some scorching on the floor. We were able to pull floor out of a closet to infill that, and then sand and refinish the entire floor and save the floor. And what was unique about that floor, it was chocolate eucalyptus, and you can't buy it anymore. Like they don't mill it into flooring anymore. So a lot of those floors made out of natural materials, either woods, ceramic tiles, those types of things, we can save them. The other thing we're going to be very concerned about when we talk about, structures and structural salvageability is hazardous building materials. Does the drywall joint compound contain asbestos? Does the paint on those surfaces contain lead? And then when you talk about fires and you talk about how things can become aerosolized, if drywall was exposed to, so if drywall was both, the joint compound was asbestos containing and it was exposed to high enough heat that it turned into that powdery dust, then the fire will aerosolize that drywall dust and it'll be all throughout the house. And so not only will we have to do environmental testing to say, hey, these are the materials that contained asbestos and we need to remove them, but we will also need to do environmental testing to determine the scope of cleaning due to asbestos and lead contamination. Now, that only happens if those materials are present in the buildings and those building materials are unsalvageable. So if it's a small kitchen fire where we're simply cleaning and encapsulating the walls, we're not even going to take the step of doing any sort of environmental testing because we do not need to disturb those materials. We're simply going to clean them and put a coat of paint on them. Similarly with lead, we have an RRP certification, which will allow us to disturb lead painted surfaces for the purpose of renovating, which we're doing. Hopefully that made sense. So in addition to asbestos and lead, we're also concerned with PCBs. This is mostly caulking around windows, arsenic, canic. If you've got an older residence, there's the potential that arsenic may be contained within the canic ceiling. Mold, if things have sat wet for longer than 3 days, usually we can identify the scope of work on our own, But on occasion, if it's been sitting long enough that it actually dries out, so if it stayed wet for a long time, grew mold, and then eventually dried out, that's usually where we have a hard time developing a scope of work relative to the mold, and we'll call in an independent third party to do testing. And then mercury, fluorescent bulbs, that kind of stuff, we're always concerned. The ballasts, we're always concerned about those. And then we kind of get into the reconstruction side of things. Hawaii is not the easiest place. Honolulu is better. Outer islands tend to be a little more problematic when it comes to engineering, architecture, and permitting. So usually what will happen if we have a fire that has sustained some pretty significant damage, what we'll do is we'll call an engineer, we'll get an engineer involved. They'll show up and they'll tell us, look, here's the side of the house that you can keep. Here's the side of the house that you should remove. And here's how you should shore the structure up so it will be structurally sound while you're doing that work. We'll then take those recommendations and have drawings completed by an architect. If we're lucky, sometimes there's drawings already available and then they just need to get marked up and stamped. Then they'll get reviewed by the engineer. So once the architect does their job, then it's got to go back to the engineer. So the engineer can say, yes, these timbers will support the load of the roof and all that stuff. Then we can submit to the planning department. And then it has to go through all of these different departments. So this is the Kiva Permitting system in Maui. So it's got to go through engineering, environmental management, fire, health, building inspection, electrical inspection, plumbing and gas inspection, planning department, water department, then has to come back and do one more final review. And this is a property that is not within the shoreline management. And so if it's within shoreline management, they have their own permitting process on top of this. The greatest challenge is finally getting your permit. Once we have our permit, the construction side of it tends to go pretty quickly, but we've had homes where we've needed to go get a building permit where it is a full calendar year before we get our building permit. And it's not because of anything other than we submit it, and building inspection comes back with questions, and then we have to get our engineer to answer those questions. And so what we found is, having somebody, and usually it's either the architect or the engineer, to route our permits, somebody who has knowledge of the individuals who are going to be inspecting and approving everything, giving them a little bit of a fee to go make sure that things happen fast. We can cut down our permit times, but that's one of those, like having a conversation with an adjuster and be like, yeah, I got to give this guy $5,000 so he can make sure that we get our permit faster. Like justifying that cost can sometimes be problematic. But usually when I have a conversation with an adjuster and I explain to him, like one of the greatest costs associated with fire claims in the state of Hawaii is adjusted living expense, AKA the hotel stays and the long-term rentals whenever somebody's displaced as a result of a fire. Like that usually adds up quicker than build cost, unless it's a complete and total burn. And so the more money we can throw at the situation to make it move faster, usually the better. If we gotta replace a floor and the floor that's on island is $1 more per square foot than the floor we can special order, that's 6 to 8 to 12 weeks. Usually those decisions make sense when you start to look at total claim cost and adjusted living expense. Then we'll go ahead and do demolition. Sometimes this is as simple as just removing a floor. Sometimes it's as complex as bringing in excavators and taking down a whole structure. Can require a permit. And then, depending on, like I said, Honolulu's not too bad. There's a number of different subcontractors and other professionals that we can lean on. But outer islands, like if you need trusses, there's one warehouse who builds trusses and, rolls them out on a daily basis. And so you got to make sure you get on that schedule. So a lot of the times we want to make sure that the right trades we need are available to do the demolition and work. This is another video. So when we talk about, the reason why I bring up alligatoring is if the framing is just charred and does not have any alligatoring to it, a lot of the times we can save the framing. And this is a majority of our projects, because most homes are built with drywall, and consciously built with drywall because it's a fire retardant. A lot of the interstitial spaces between in the walls or in the ceilings, they don't tend to get impacted, but they do tend to see some heat and usually a lot of soot due to the building pressurization. And so one of the things that we can do is there's a process where we'll use media blasting. So either if it's neighbor islands, usually it's baking soda, just because the availability of the media. If we're in Honolulu, we can get dry ice pellets from Airgas. And so dry ice is an option for us. What's cool about dry ice is when dry ice hits the surface of whatever you're media blasting, it turns into a vapor. And so the only thing that's left to clean up is whatever the debris and residue that you blast off the surface. Whereas with soda, you have to clean up both the residue and the baking soda. And then we have done some sponge blasting, which is really cool, but the availability of the media tends to be problematic. The advantage of sponge blasting is you can actually recycle the media. You can use it over and over again. You can actually clean it. So here's a quick video on exactly how media blasting works. So that is soda blasting. And you can see that it doesn't remove all of the charring off the materials, but it does remove most of it. And so you'll see like the denser grains tend to hang on to the char a little bit heavier, whereas the softwood inlays tend to let go of it when you're talking about media blasting. Now, this is just conjecture because I get to teach the class, and so we get to look at things that I think are cool. This is kind of what's the emerging technology with regards to media blasting is lasers, which I think is ironic because like lasers, there's nothing more futuristic than lasers. But what's unique about, so they call it laser ablation. So there's, what do they call it? Like when you take water and you turn it from a gas into a liquid, has a name. When you take it from, a liquid into a gas. And so when you take a solid and you turn it into the plasma state, which is beyond the vapor state, they call that ablation. And so essentially that's what you're doing is you're superheating something for a very, very short period of time. And that's essentially how laser ablation works, but it's pretty cool stuff. And the really cool thing is there's no residue to clean up. So after you're done, you're done. Big problem is that we don't have one of these, mostly because it costs, I'm trying to parallel it without, well, it just costs, like a good system costs almost $250,000. So very few of us have that, and we don't do a ton of media blasting. So I keep trying to justify it every year and I come up short, but really, really, really nifty technology. And there's a few of the larger companies in the mainland that have invested in this technology. And when I talk story with them, they're like, look, it's awesome. Yeah, it's expensive, but it works every time, and it's really, really good. So after we've done our media blasting, we'll do critical cleaning. Now, a majority of our services, if you sat through a mold class, you'll hear me ramble on about how important critical cleaning is. It is, between that and the actual physical source removal, so call that number one and call this number two, they are the most important parts of what we do. A little pile of soot in the corner of an attic will still stink and smell like a campfire 3-4 years later on a hot, humid day. And so usually if we have issues with odor reemergence, it has something to do with we didn't remove enough material that we should have, or our cleaning was insufficient. And so this is where you'll actually catch me if I end up on site. I will walk around, I will put on the white glove, and I will wipe every surface. And if I get any soil on that glove, sorry boys, you got to re-clean. But we are fortunate. A majority of our services rely on critical cleaning, and so our staff is pretty tuned into that. They don't, and most of them wear it like a badge of pride. On our mold jobs, the guys are always throwing elbows over who got the lowest spore count on the last job they cleaned. So we do try and, put a little bit of a game to it, and that keeps it interesting. But man, I remember from my days as, as a technician in the field, critical cleaning, it's kind of boring. But it's the one thing, if you don't do right, it comes back and bites you in the butt. So all the vacuums we use are, like our air scrubbers, have HEPA filters, high efficiency particulate air, which means they filter 99.7% of all particulate matter down to 0.3 microns in size. We'll do an initial HEPA vacuum, which will remove the large debris and remove as much soot as possible before we set the soot. So I talked about those fires where we're like cleaning the wall, nothing comes off. Then we'll go ahead and clean the wall aggressively and set that soot. And this is kind of the last step of source removal. So if we've done demolition, there's still debris and those types of things. Usually after we've done our critical cleaning, we'll go in, we'll take a look, and that's when we'll start to evaluate from an odor perspective. So another component is, do we wet wipe or do we dry wipe? So dry wiping uses, we call them chem sponges, but they're these kind of these like goofy looking giant rubber bricks. And they work like an eraser on the back of a pencil, except for you're erasing an entire wall. And so works really well on flat or matte finished surfaces, light soot, light odor. And really where you use dry wiping is in those circumstances where you're trying not to paint. If you look at the job and you evaluate it and you go, hey, this is a scenario in which I think we can get away without painting, then you're going to want to use dry wiping. And then this is the one thing that actually works the best for like those protein fires or those mixed or synthetic fires that have that sticky smeary kind of soot. If it's light enough, you can use the chem sponge and you'll be able to get it off. Wet wiping, a majority of our jobs, we will wet wipe, particularly, if the severity is high enough, we'll just always go to wet wiping. Glossier cleanable surfaces, heavy soot, heavy odor. The reason why wet wiping works so well is usually we combine a surfactant, which is, you guys have probably heard that word in front of my mouth 3-4 times now and gone, what the hell is surfactant, Anthony? It's just soap. So we combine a surfactant with an odor counteractant, and that helps us in the deodorization side of it. So we're doing two things. We're physically removing soil and we're deodorizing in the same wipe. If we know like we're going to have to repaint the house, we won't try and dry wipe. We will just only wet wipe. Dry wiping will take a significant chunk of time longer, and that's why. So once we've got all of our critical cleanings done, we'll go ahead and proceed with deodorization. Now, anybody who teaches you about fire restoration will impress upon you the importance of making sure that you've removed all the source of the odor. So, and this is out of Marty's book. These procedures involve the physical removal of fire residues and their odors. Examples of source removal include demolition, vacuuming, washing, abrasive resurfacing, shampooing, hot water extraction, scraping, removing of the affected contents. Odorous particulates may be removed from ambient air by filtration, absorption, and air exchange. Advantages are removal of fire residues is permanent and minimizes any environmental burden, and the appearance of the surface is unchanged. Disadvantages are that the residues are not always accessible, time constraints or cost factors may make source removal unfeasible. Great example is that structural lumber that has char on it. You're not going to go cut all that out. You're going to media blast it. So then that way you can save on the expense of having to replace it. Step 2, you're going to utilize oxidizers. So these are ozone, hydroxyls, and essentially what an oxidizer does is release oxygen molecules. So ozone is chemically O3, so it's 3 oxygen atoms together to form an ion, and it's a super unstable bond. So that third oxygen atom really wants to break off and pair with other compounds, and that action actually helps eliminate odors. Pretty cool stuff. Similar like bleach is an oxidizer. So if you have stinky gym shorts and you bleach them, they don't stink anymore. Advantages may provide swift, effective abatement of odors. Disadvantages, not all fire residues respond to oxidation. Oxidizers are bleaches and may be corrosive or add new odors. If you over ozone a structure, it takes a long time for that ozone smell to go away. Step 3, counteractants. So we have a variety of products. There's a number of different things that work in this realm. Odor counteractants are produced in solid, granular, and gel and liquid form. They may be placed directly in odorous areas as well as sprays, atomized, or added to cleaning solutions. They are often used to supplement source removal. Advantages, counteractants may resolve odor situations where source removal and other processes are not feasible. Disadvantages, may not be permanent. Their own scent may persist or leave residual odors and may be over-relied upon as a standalone process. We try and use more oxidizers, less counteractants, just because when a counteractant is in the space, it's doing its job. You should not be able to smell that, but when that counteractant goes away, if there's still a residual fire odor, the only option you have is to put more counteractant in, and that's what we want to avoid. So this is a quick video on thermal fogging, which is something that we'll do, and it's essentially taking a smoke odor counteractant, putting it in a thermal fogging machine, and what this machine does is it heats the counteractant into a vapor with the expectation that that vapor is going to travel through the structure just like the smoke odor and soot did. And so the hope is that wherever that went, by replicating it, making it hot, those types of things, pressurizing, we can get a counteractant into those spaces where the smoke and soot went. I like how they slow it down for dramatic effect. But yeah, so the other thing we have to do is when we do thermal fogging, we always have to notify the fire department, because if it starts coming out of eaves or something like that, it'll look like the house is on fire. And we don't want our buddies over at the fire department to have to respond to us when we're just trying to do thermal fogging, thinking it's a fire. Next step we'll do is encapsulating. So if we can't remove the source, then we'll oxidize it. If we can't oxidize it, Then we'll apply a counteractant. And then if we can't counteract it, then we'll go ahead and apply an encapsulant. So the video I showed you where we were soda blasting, we always, unfinished lumber like that, we will always encapsulate just because we know we can't remove enough of that material to successfully remove the odor. So whatever minimal amount of odor remains in the framing, we will encapsulate. So these are adhesives or coatings that block the transmission of odors from fire residues. Sealers and encapsulants are formed in water extendable resins, blah, 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 blah. Back in the day, we used to use white pigmented shellac, which is essentially kills. And then since then, they've improved quite a bit. This product is one that we use a lot called Ultra Recon. The reason why we use it is because it is lower VOC, whereas those white pigmented shellacs, they're just nasty to work with. Like if your product only dilutes down with denatured alcohol, it's a pretty nasty chemically based product. And so if we can achieve the same results with a product that's a little bit more environmental friendly because it's specifically designed for that purpose, then that's what we'll use. Disadvantages: solvent odors may affect sensitive individuals and temporarily mask smoke odors that later return. Sealers may change the appearance of unfinished framing and may prevent the application of other removal processes. So we always want to make sure that when we're using an encapsulant, we have removed as much of the odor that we can through other methods. Because once we apply this encapsulant, if it still stinks, we kind of have to go back and remove that encapsulant, and it's a big pain in the butt. So for that reason and that reason alone, if we're ever doing a fire job with you and you're like, man, these guys are being super comprehensive, it's because I've had that one phone call where I come back and the attic still stinks, and now I got to hunt down odor in an encapsulated attic, try and find it, fix it, and that's never fun. And getting that phone call for any reason is just never fun. We're professionals, and we take pride in our ability to successfully remove these odors. Just a little snapshot. This is not a class on reconstruction. Oh, we have a question from Linda. Then can you paint over the sealant? You absolutely can. So commonly on drywall, what we'll do is we'll use a white pigmented shellac as our primer or sealer, and then you can paint over that. In that application, we'll use a shellac simply because we know the shellac is compatible with whatever finish paint we're going to put on top of it. For the exposed framing, we like to use that Recon product because it just works better. It's a little more environmentally friendly. Good question. Thanks, Linda. Okay, reconstruction, and then we're going to wrap up on time. Usually first step, I'll just run through the steps. So if we're doing reconstruction, so we've gotten our house clean, safe, dry, and odor-free. We've successfully removed everything we need to, and now we're at a point where we're ready to build it back. Usually the first thing we need to do is make sure we have electric and water. Then if there's any footings or foundations we need to replace, we'll do those. Any exterior structures, fencing. Then we'll get into framing, roofing, all the rough mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, any masonry, windows, doors, insulation, exterior trim, exterior paint. Then we'll flip and start working on the inside, hang any sheetrock we need to, flooring, interior trim, ceramic tile, cabinets, countertops, appliances, and then our finish MEP, mechanical, plumbing, and electrical, and then we'll follow it up with a final clean. With construction being what it is in our state, we do have a crew, we've got 160 people statewide, so we can handle quite a bit. But for our larger projects, we have historically relied on subcontractors, and those subcontractors are busy now because we've been doing business with them since 2007 when nobody had any business. Usually we get priority and they'll show up to our jobs before they show up to anybody else's. But, in fairness to them, if they've already committed to somebody and I'm asking them to jump and move right now, it's always fair to try and give them grace. But it's an interesting environment to be a part of right now with construction being what it is in the state. All right, I'll open it up and see if anybody has any other questions. Let me pull up the chat so I have that. I wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to spend with us today. Here we go. I have some quick announcements too. So here we go. Oh, cool. So for everybody who attended today, we're going to donate to a Hawaii nonprofit called Aloha Harvest that takes quality excess food that would be thrown out and delivers it to Hawaii shelters and other nonprofits to distribute to Hawaii's hungry. We're going to go ahead and donate. It's, you know, on a per head count, but we're going to donate a few $100s there. And then confirming CE credits. So everybody should have received an email from Kira yesterday with important instructions on how to confirm your CE credits. Usually we do this in person and it's easy, but because we're doing it online, it's a little bit of a process. So following the close of class today, we will begin to prepare individual documents for each of you to sign via DocuSign, an application that allows for digital signing. So there's no need to print out the form and fill it in manually. The information you will need is your name registered with your insurance agent license, your license number, address, and signature. If you do not receive it by the end of the day, Kira's asking if you can go ahead and reach out directly to her. We make sure everybody gets their CE, but if you don't reach out to us, I don't have a ton that I can do. So if you're not getting your CEs, make sure that you reach out to us. It does take a few hours to compile the DocuSigns. So you should receive it today, but probably not until after lunch. Yeah. Kira, did you have anything else to add?
Nope, just that. So yeah, guys, just kind of stand by and wait for those DocuSigns to come because we actually populate them individually and then send them to each of you. So it does take some time to get through the entire list, but we always get it done by end of day. So I always just say, if you don't receive it by end of day, just check your junk mail first to look for a document or an email from DocuSign, which allows you to digitally fill out the information and sign it. If it's not in your junk folder, then yeah, please go ahead and email me at kira@premhigh.com, and I just dropped my email into the chat box. So yeah, thank you so much, you guys.
Yep. And so if you got to go ahead and take off. You won't offend me by clicking off. But just to kind of close down, you know, I opened with our mission statement, restoring the lives, businesses, and communities of Hawaii, something that we take very seriously. So just a few examples. Upper image on the upper left is Greg, who was our BDM in Maui, and then Megan, who really doesn't, she handles all the invoicing. So if you get an invoice, it was generated by Megan. But today, what they're doing is breaking down smoke odor counteractant and laundry booster into pint-sized jars. This was 2018 when we had the big fires in Lahaina Luna. Kind of looked at that fire and said, you know what, that Lahaina Luna neighborhood is, you know, typically older, more working class families who are probably going to take the initiative on their own and clean things up on themselves. So what we wanted to do was make sure that they had the right tools. And so Greg spent a week driving around and handing out pint jars of smoke odor counteractant and laundry booster. Image on the top right, this was from March. One of our crews was driving by on the North Shore and saw a bunch of local residents trying to make sure a stream bed was clear. So then that way, if it rained again, wouldn't flood over the road and one of their houses. And so they just pulled over and put on the rubber boots and dug in and helped. Image on the bottom left. So kind of a cool story. We had one of the resident managers that we do a chunk of business with. People like to abandon bikes at his property for some reason. I'm not really sure why, but so he had a collection of like 20 to 30 bicycles, and he just wanted to make sure that they went somewhere where they would get used. And so what we did is we just literally the only part we played in this was taking the bikes from A to B, but we made sure those bikes got donated to a nonprofit that would take them, fix them up, and give them to young kids who didn't have a bike. Bottom right, this is one of my favorite images of all time. So this is our crew, members of our reconstruction crew here in Maui, and they had been removing a floor, and they just happened to see, they got lucky, they happened to see that there was a note that somebody had written on the bottom side of the floor. And it turned out it was this lovely note that our customer's father had written when he installed the floor, knowing she was probably going to live there long enough and eventually change the floor. So we were able to give her that as a wonderful little memento. And, you know, like I said, thank goodness my guys actually saw it and, you know, they did the right thing with it. I want to thank you for taking the time to spend with us today. I know when it comes to online, you guys have a lot of options. And while I geek out and really enjoy this, I know it may not be the most compelling bit of information, but I hope everybody took a little something away that you can share in your office and with your insureds should they have a fire. And with that, we'll go ahead and close the class. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you and have a great day.